This is Tumbleweed Radio. I'm Connor Orr. Today, the story of the Ludlow Massacre is not well known. Once, it made national news, and the phrase "Remember Ludlow" was a rallying cry, a battle cry for labor organizers, activists, and the downtrodden all across the United States. Times have changed, though. The events that transpired at Ludlow took place over 100 years ago, and in America, that's a long time. There have been so many other inflection points since then that have come to overshadow that moment, so that in public consciousness, the memory of Ludlow is like so many old coal towns in this nation, tattered and in ruins. If you visit the Ludlow Memorial today, just off of I-25 between Trinidad and Aguilar, you'll find a humble, quiet scene. There's a small fenced-in park surrounding a pillar and a statue of a miner and his family. Carved into that pillar are the names of some of the men, women, and children who died on that dreadful day. A metal trapdoor is placed over a concrete staircase which leads down into the ground, a small and dark pit with an even darker history. Just outside the fence is a barn-style picnic area connected to a red and white building adorned with a metal sign upon which hang the words, "God bless the coal miners of Ludlow, Colorado." The park is rarely crowded. I've been there 3 or 4 times, and I've only encountered 1 or 2 other people there. Most of the time, it's empty. One could almost believe that Ludlow has been forgotten. Except that there's a guest book outside the park. Several of them, actually. Spiral notebooks, legal pads, a couple of those black and white spotted composition notebooks, and the pages of these books are filled to the brim with names of visitors, school groups, miners, and memories. Once a year, folks still gather from all across the country to commemorate and remember what happened at Ludlow, and I understand that at those events, this little park once again becomes the scene of passionate displays of pride and determination to fight for a better way of life. And there is one group in particular who remembers Ludlow, a group who still uses its name as a battle cry, who will not forget, and who do the hard work of telling this story and saying the names of the people who died here. They're the same group who paid for and put up this monument, the United Mine Workers of America. Their story is a long one, a fraught one, and the Colorado Coalfield War is only one chapter of its history. Today, the United Mine Workers of America is the largest miners' union in the United States, with Wikipedia putting their current membership at 80,000. But in the beginning, it was just a small group with a big dream, and in the early days especially, it faced tremendous opposition in its fight to bring power to the working class and to advocate for better wages and living conditions. The UMWA was formed in 1890 in Columbus, Ohio, through a merger of 2 older groups, the Knights of Labor and the National Progressive Miners Union. The new union was formed with rules specifically barring racial discrimination, but of course, practice was more challenging than theory. Labor historian Herbert Gutman wrote extensively on the career of Richard L. Davis, who was a black miner who served on the UMWA National Executive Board in 1896 and 1897 as evidence of the egalitarian attitude prevalent in the Union in his essay, The Negro and the United Mine Workers of America. His work has since been criticized, notably in the International Journal of Politics, Culture, and Society in 1988 by author Herbert Hill, who noted that Gutman failed to account for the fact that while Davis served on the executive board during the union's infancy, while it still desperately needed the support of Southern black miners, he was not re-elected in 1898, when union membership swelled from just shy of 10,000 to nearly 33,000, right at the start of the union's meteoric rise in membership and power. While it is difficult to tell exactly what role racism played in unifying white miners against black miners, we can employ a bit of historical imagination to reckon that racism was as prevalent in the early UMWA as it was in nearly every corner of its contemporary world. Nevertheless, the UMWA was fairly unique in those times for even attempting to form a racially integrated political organization, one which was driven by class solidarity rather than racial solidarity, and it made good sense considering the union's motivations and targeted demographic. Remember, back in those days, the category of white was not so broad as it is today. While it would hardly be fair to compare the plight of oppressed European immigrants to the plights of black Americans, there were many immigrants from European countries, including Italy and Ireland, who were not considered white and who were looked down upon, mistreated, and even killed for their race. Indeed, Greek immigrants were considered practically the lowest of the low, comparable only in the eyes of white Americans to African and Asian immigrants, who were viewed as truly subhuman. One thing that all Union members, black, white, or otherwise, had in common, though, was that they were all subject to appalling living and working conditions, and the UMWA was formed from the knowledge that conditions wouldn't improve unless there were bodies, thousands of able bodies, who would be willing to walk out and strike, even for months on end. This eventually did turn out to be the case, but not in any short order. The UMWA was able to stage a few strikes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but it was not until 1933 that unions were officially awarded the right to represent workers in collective bargaining. This took place while the UMWA was being led by the powerful and charismatic union president John Lewis, who served as president from 1920 to 1960. Lewis gave many incredible speeches, and I've decided to include some audio from one that he gave on April 3rd of 1947 in Washington, D.C., entitled Protection for Miners. Now, clearly, this speech took place and references a situation that existed over 30 years after the Colorado Coalfield War, but I've decided to include it because it is an incredible speech, and the broad strokes of his rhetoric absolutely applied to the situation in 1913 and 14.
If we must grind up human flesh and bones in the industrial machine that we call modern America, then before God I assert that those who consume the coal and you and I who benefit from that service because we live in comfort, we owe protection to those men first, and we owe the security for their families if they die. I say it, I voice it, I proclaim it, and I care not who in heaven or hell opposes it. That's what I believe about that.
That's powerful stuff. In 1912, the UMWA helped to organize a strike of the mines in Paint Creek and Cabin Creek in West Virginia. All 41 mines in Paint Creek were unionized, but miners of these mines were compensated at a rate of 2.5 cents less per ton of coal than other union miners in the area. Over 8,000 miners rose up in a strike that lasted nearly a year and a half and ended up being particularly bloody, with coal mine operators employing armed guards from the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency to break the strike. Now, the Baldwin-Felts agents were straight-up goons, and they tended to break strikes with extreme violence, using snipers, machine guns, and physical battery to literally break miners' wills to strike. This wasn't the first time that the Baldwin-Felts Agency broke strikes, and it wouldn't be the last. They went on to play a major role in the Colorado Coalfield War, in which they employed the same ultra-violent methods to a similar end. But they weren't the only characters who made an appearance in both Paint Creek and the Southern Coalfield. Mother Jones, the renowned and powerful labor leader, showed up at both locations as well, and, as she tended to do everywhere she went, helped to incite an unbreakable spirit of resistance in strikers that even the most brutal of goons could not suppress. Here are a few quotes from a speech that Mother Jones gave in a baseball park in West Virginia in 1912 that really highlight her fiery rhetoric.
Fellow workers, let me say this to you, that no one person wins a strike, that it is the combined forces of the oppressed, the robbed class to get together and win a strike. The operators, the money, power, never in all of human history have won a strike. You have never lost a strike. That is, the workers have not. You have simply rolled up your banners and retreated for a while until you could solidify your army and then come back and ask the pirates, what in hell are you gonna do about it? Now, here we are today, as we have been. This is the outcome of an age-long struggle. It did not begin yesterday, nor today. It is an age-long struggle, and it has crossed the oceans to you. It is about to crystallize. It is about to close just now. The ship is sailing. It calls for pilots to come aboard. I want to say to you that all the ages of history have been ages of robbery, oppression, of hypocrisy, of lying. And I want to say to you, tyrants of the world, that all the centuries past have been yours. But we are facing the dawn of the world's greatest century. We are facing the dawn of a separate century. 40,000 men, 40,000 braves said to me, "We are ready for battle, mother, if they don't do business." So we are, my friends, and the day of human slavery has got to end. Talk about a few guards who got a bullet in their skulls. The whole of Amata have got bullets in their skulls. How many miners do you murder within the walls of your wealth-producing institutions? How many miners get their death in the mines?
Yowza! That old lady was not messing around. Here's a bit of background on Mother Jones to help illustrate why she was so passionate about labor causes and why she was so inspiring to so many workers. Mother Jones, believe it or not, was not her actual name. She was born in 1837 in Cork, Ireland, as Mary G. Harris, but her family moved to Canada when she was 10 years old in order to escape the Great Famine. She grew up and lived around Toronto until the age of 23, when she moved to the United States to teach for a while at a convent in Monroe, Michigan. Apparently, she found her work at the school quite depressing, so she quit after a few years, but retained a lifelong love for children and a passion for getting them educated. After leaving Michigan, she moved to Chicago for a while, and then to Memphis, where in 1861 she met and married George Jones, who was an iron worker and organizer for the National Union of Iron Molders. This was Mary Harris Jones's, first experience with a labor union. The couple had 4 children and may have been happy for a time, but tragically, all 4 children and Mary's husband died of yellow fever in 1867, before the kids were even 5 years old. This was clearly a profound and tragic moment for Mary Harris Jones. She decided to move back to Chicago and resume work as a dressmaker, no doubt hoping to put the tragedy in her life behind her. It wasn't so simple, though. In 1871, she lost everything she owned in the Great Chicago Fire, which led to her working closely in the reconstruction of the city with members of the Knights of Labor, which was the country's largest labor union, and would go on to merge with the National Progressive Miners Union to become the United Mine Workers of America in 1890. And so began Mary Harris Jones's long career as a labor organizer. She was only 34 years old at the time, so it'd be another 26 years before she adopted the nickname Mother Jones and started dressing in old-timey dresses. Throughout her career, Mother Jones was a staunch defendant of the working class and was involved in a boatload of strikes and was arrested numerous times, even serving a short stint in the Werfenau County Jail under the county courthouse, although she was released after it was determined that she was arrested illegally. With the rise of feminism in America in the 20th century, Mother Jones has been often criticized for her opposition to women's suffrage, being quoted as saying, "You don't need to vote to raise hell." She definitely believed that a woman's place was in the household, and she fought so passionately for workers' rights in part because she believed that a man ought to be able to provide for his wife so that she could stay home with their children. When looking back in history, we always need to try to put figures and ideas into the context of their times, so that when we do criticize them, we criticize them fairly. Just like the UMWA, it is important to recognize that although Mother Jones held some beliefs that are outdated by today's standards, she was still a very powerful woman in a time when that was taboo. She was an inspiration to many, a champion for children, and a key figure in the establishing of fundamental rights for workers, which today we take for granted. And that concludes today's episode. Next week, we're going to dig into the actual strike of 1913 and 14, Louis Tikas, and the Ludlow Massacre. If you're still hungry for more sweet Tumbleweed Radio content, please check out the other episode that I released this week, episode 13 and a half, a conversation with Zeese Papanikolas, in which I talk with the author of Buried Unsung, and we dig into everything from what it was like to be a miner in the early 20th century, to women's roles and labor strikes, all the way to the Ludlow Massacre and the murder of Louis Tikas. Thank you all so much for listening to Tumbleweed Radio. You know, we're approaching the end of Season 1, and I couldn't be happier with how things have gone so far. Bumps in the road and disorientation and everything. I'm really excited to start working on Season 2, But in the meantime, keep checking your feed, because there's a couple more podcasts coming your way before Christmas. Talk to you soon, everybody. This podcast was written and produced by Connor Orr and is a production of the World Journal. Links to the cited sources are in the description.
Fellow workers, let me say this to you, that no one person wins a strike, that it is the combined forces of the oppressed, the robbed class, to get together and win a strike. 40,000 braves said to me, "We are ready for battle, mother, if they don't do business." So we are, my friends, and the day of human slavery has got to end. Talk about a few guards who got a bullet in their skulls. The whole of them ought to have got bullets in their skulls. What in the hell are you gonna do about it?